Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk about the planned cross country that will be part of your private pilot check ride. And in the oral section, and also kind of in the flight section, we'll get to that in a moment. But in the oral portion of the exam, you'll be asked to brief the cross country flight with your examiner. Day or two before the exam, typically, the examiner will provide for you a itinerary, a departure and destination airport. In my case, it is Burlington Alamance, Bravo Uniform Yankee to Charlotte International, Charlie Lima Tango. And as you can see here, we have a magnetic course and a distance. What you want to do prior to actually punching this into any kind of electronic aid, you'll want to do this on a sectional in sort of a written format, very old school pencil and paper style. The reason why I think that this is helpful is because you'll not have the answer in front of you, and the electronic aid will provide for you an answer that you can kind of double check, and you really only have one chance at it because your itinerary is going to be fixed, and if you want to kind of test yourself on it, you'll receive the answer when you punch it in, and it's kind of does you no good to kind of back out from that since you already know what the answer is. It'd be good to kind of just do this old school and then double check your results with what SkyVector or something else will provide for you. So anyway, 236 should be your true course. And the reason why you have 244 is because of the magnetic variation that is right here. 8 west, and east is least, west is best. So we add 8 to 236, and we come up with 244. All right, and then the distance, of course, is just going to be, however the plotter, however you achieve that distance from, plotting it out. So that should be pretty straightforward if you're able to draw a nice straight line across with your plotter. So that out of the way, you'll want to take into account fuel considerations. So in my case, my training plane was a Cessna 152. Pretty straightforward. You can just have one passenger with you and a little bit of luggage, usually no luggage or marginal amount, and some amount of fuel, up to about 4 hours cruise flight, not counting or counting whatever you're not supposed to use for your VFR minimums. 4 hours total, and if you back out the VFR minimums, you have 3.5 hours. Ideally 3 hours, considering that you'll want to kind of err on the side of caution with those VFR minimums. Half an hour is kind of a little bit dodgy to choose, and during your exam, you'll probably even want to answer something to the effect of, I'd like to have 1 hour of fuel left, rather than just spouting out the legal minimum alone and then not kind of adding in that disclaimer. So 3 hours cruise flight total, and we burned off an hour because my home airport was Henderson, Oxford, and my instructor and I went to Burlington and did a little bit of pilotage work along the route of flight a bit. This is what I was getting to from before when I mentioned that in the practical portion of the exam, in the flight portion, you'll want to actually know a little bit about the pilotage, at least in the beginning stages of the flight. So the visual kind of checkpoints, maybe a few minutes into the flight, and then usually what will happen is that you'll break from there and continue onward. So after the first checkpoint, my DP was satisfied that I understood how to mark time from departure, which is very important. Make sure that you note the time of departure so that you can kind of know how long it takes to get to the drag strip in this case, which was my first visual checkpoint, and the distance and the velocity that you're going, and as you're climbing out of Burlington here, and then kind of noting the time and seeing if you're ahead, behind, or on time. And then that usually satisfies the DP. After one or two visual checkpoints at most, you'll be good to go to continue on with other things like maneuvers and landings and things like that. Right, so fuel considerations, we've talked about that. Weight and balance, I talked a little bit about the passenger and luggage and fuel. Of course, weight has to be taken into account and balance to make sure that your CG is not too far forward or too far aft. And it's helpful to explain the differences of the advantages and disadvantages of being a bit forward and a bit aft that's within envelope. And of course, explaining that you cannot go over your weight by even 1 pound, that legally speaking. I'm not talking about what actually happens in real life. I'm talking about the legal, because the DP is really just interested in the legal explanation. I don't ever recommend anyone go over their legal limit anyway. But so that out of the way, now that we talked about weight and balance, the next thing I like to talk about is weather. So, it's a very long topic, and we could talk about it for quite a bit of time, but the brief form of this is, okay, well, maybe punch in a weather briefing from your favorite EFB, or use Aviation weather. In our case, this flight looks a little bit doomed from the beginning, in the sense that for VFR conditions, we don't look very good to actually take off at this time. So you'll want to talk about that with the DP and say, like, well, hey, the scenario that we laid out, I don't think it's really going to work out, because we have marginal conditions, and Danville is kind of to the north of where we're starting from, and Winston-Salem's kind of not that close either. But the prevailing conditions are such that we just have very dodgy conditions, and also just something I didn't mention earlier, that the selected altitude, and you'll want to select an altitude, of course, for cruise flight, was 3,500. I'll get into why I did 3,500 in a little bit when we talk about airspace and obstacle considerations. But 3,500 fits into this not very well. Especially, Hickory is not too far away from Charlotte, and Charlotte itself, we have scattered at 1,400. It just looks really bad and broken at 3,500. So we aren't able to do our selected altitude for a VFR flight. That kind of under consideration, you could think about, like, well, hey, can this be done at other times of the day? Not really. Maybe at a later time when there's clearing conditions, if that happens for this day. But the only VFR time was kind of in the middle of the night. We had low IFR, fog conditions prevailed, and this is typical in the summertime in the southeast. So yeah, you'll want to kind of talk about this with the DP. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't be able to do your check ride necessarily, because at 3,500 feet ceiling around Greensboro, which is kind of this practice area where you'll be doing, not over Greensboro, but to the southwest, where I was doing my practice or my maneuver testing and other portions of the flight portion of the check ride. I just needed about 3,500 feet minimum, and this would have been okay to do the check ride in, pretty much. It would have been pretty close, but it looks like it could have been done, depending on how conservative your DPE is. I think that it would be still okay to say, well, hey, we can do this check ride because the conditions are improving and we have 3,500 foot ceilings. You'll need a minimum of 2,000 feet for your stalls. That's kind of a little bit tight. If you add another 500 feet, maybe 1,000 feet, just for additional margin, I think that you're safer potentially to say, hey, I think we can do this check ride, just from a cloud condition. As far as the winds are concerned, these winds are perfectly fine for flight. Even if they were crosswinds, this is perfectly okay. Yeah, so that's that's kind of it on weather. I don't want to talk too much about it. And the winds aloft, they're going to matter from your traffic pattern and other things that under consideration. But from a cross country standpoint, again, there's so much we can get into, but we want to talk about like what makes sense en route, and kind of if there's any kind of SIGMETs or AirMETs that are there. NOTAMs, of course, very important. We don't have any SIGMETs or convective SIGMETs or AirMETs involved here, so we do have a NOTAM, though. It just kind of mentions one of the runways is closed. Right. So, what do you want to talk about next? We want to talk about airspace. All right. So, the other couple of days ago, the president was in town and was in Raleigh, and the TFR that extended out was about 30 nautical miles. So it kind of encompassed a pretty wide section of airspace. So kind of about this much airspace. It didn't really impact us since we were traveling southwest, but it's something that you would want to just kind of mention to the DP. It's just so you have an understanding of it, perhaps. Airspace is pretty straightforward until you get to the Class Bravo. This alert area does not involve us, either from an altitude or a direction of flight standpoint. We're close to it, but we don't hit it. Mode C Vail is right here, and then even more importantly, the Class Bravo is here. So you'll have to, for altitude of 3,500, which was planned, gets us safely above all of these different sector minimums, and allows us to kind of not have to worry about like, hey, we have to be 4,500 going west, 5,500 going east, because 3,500 is below 3,000 AGL, since the general elevation is at least 600 feet or higher. Okay, so once we get into Class Bravo, we're still okay all the way up to here, and we're technically still okay all the way to here. But keep in mind, this is 3,600 feet, and if we selected 3,500 feet, that gives us very little margin for error. So I would say, if you plan this out, that you'd want to get permission to enter the Class Bravo space, maybe out here, but definitely no later than here. It's just too risky to enter into here, playing around with 100-foot altitude differential. 3,500 also gets you above the Class Delta shelf here, and the margin's a little bit higher, which is good. But yeah, this is very chancy to kind of, you do 34 or 3,300, you're better here, but then you're closer to here too. So you get your Class Bravo permission, mention that to the DPE. All right, so for the various checkpoints, notice here we have lots of radials to play with here. So we have 3 different radials from the Greensboro VOR, terminal VOR, and we can use the Liberty VOR. So we got lots of good stuff here. If you have 2 VORs, you can even triangulate your position pretty nicely. But you'll want to choose the visual checkpoints, and here there's plenty of them. Drag strip, a couple of airports, cluster of towers, the lake down here. I forget what I chose down here. There's some roads. The airport's a bit far out of the way. You do have this town, might be visible. I think that High Point might be visible too, considering its size. There's a tower here, but that's probably not necessarily that high. So you have to be a little bit. There's a road here. There's 64. So that's a good one too. But yeah, here is a little bit more deserted. You'll have to be a little bit more clever here. And then after the lake, you have a town, airport there. You have Kannapolis, you have a pretty large town, and then it gets pretty easy after that. You're going to be vectored in at that point, to Charlotte, pretty soon after. And, of course, Concord Regional. All right, so, and then what about our lost procedures? Well, with lost, we have two nice VORs here. Again, we can triangulate our position. Pick one VOR to kind of work with. If you have two to choose from. For lost procedures, you could, you can dial in your inbound radial and then fly to Liberty and then fly outbound at approximately 025 or whatever to get to back to Burlington. Yeah, so there's not much else there. You have to kind of just, figure out. And actually, after doing a lot of it, DP sometimes sets it up that after doing a lot of different maneuvers and, stall practice and engine out procedures, you may find yourself, and I think in my situation, I was somewhat lost. And I selected the 025 outbound radial and determined where I was relative to that. Kind of made my way towards that. Frequencies. This is helpful if you wanted to get flight following. You want to talk with your DP. They may quiz you on this, that, 126.6 is good frequency to contact Greensboro approach if you want flight following, and always recommended, especially after you get your check ride. So know your approach frequencies. They're not too hard to memorize, a few of them that are in your local airfield, and then get you started. They'll hand you off as you travel. And these are helpful to know. And that's about it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, like and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Bye now.